Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about How the Grinch Stole Christmas from 2000. So when this film originally came out, I didn't see it. In fact, the first time I saw it was like for this review, basically. This came out when I was like in my teens, and I kind of thought, well, what's the point of remaking a classic like the original TV special? How can you get any better than that? And what would be the point in trying to top that or do a version of that? I have no nostalgia for this film because how could I? Never saw it before. I have more nostalgia for the ads. I find this film both interesting and horrible because it very much takes the Joel Schumacher Batman and Robin, Batman Forever, which needs to be remembered that was part of that Schumacher run too, but it wasn't as bad as Batman and Robin, so generally everyone lets it go. But it kind of has that similar ugly aesthetic, while also sort of reminded me of Robert Altman's Popeye, not really in a good way, but there's like way too much going on. There's all these characters that I don't think really need to be in there, but it's also interesting watching this after, this is my third Grinch review this Christmas. First one in front of the tree. I didn't have a tree during the last ones. Illumination releasing all early and such, and me reviewing the other one too early. But I do find it interesting how people take a story that essentially, like when they made the animated special, I think if you read it, it was like 12-15 minutes if you just read the book, and they needed to fill time for that special. So the idea of making that into a movie, a feature-length film, you're gonna have problems doing that. And it's interesting what similar decisions that this and the Illumination one took, particularly when it comes to Cindy Lou, who oh man, I just did that. Okay, who they seem to want to change because there's basically, in terms of the story, there's sort of like three real characters with names. There's the Who's, but that's like just a bunch of people. That's not a character. There's the Grinch, there's the dog, Max, right? I think, whatever, it's a dog, and then Cindy Lou. That's it. The idea is to make Cindy Lou a bigger character because basically Grinch and Max have to do like what they do. You can't really change that too much. With Cindy Lou, you just have one scene, so let's make that into something more. Like, I think Illumination might have done a better job than this film did with that. I think in both times, the problem with these adaptations is they do something to the Grinch that I think it kind of goes against what the Grinch is really standing for, which is it's not about all the crap. It's not about, all the decorations and stuff, although that is nice and that's part of the festivities. It's about being together and it's about this genuine emotion. And I think that end is something that lands in the Grinch better than any other Christmas special or Christmas book, other than Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol, which this is also based on. Making this about more like modern day Christmas, which this and the Illumination thing does with like, oh, there's a competition for best house, oh, there's all these things. Instead of like, one, neither of these take advantage of the Dr. Seussness of it and everything like that. Why would you do a live action one? I mean, I think that's the thing when I'm watching it, like what's the point? And the reason for this, Dr. Seuss died and he never wanted his stuff made into movies. But then, when he did die, his estate or his widow was like, I mean, I don't mind so much. And she basically had her lawyers go out and demand, she wanted, like, according to Wikipedia, her agents announced a letter to studios, the film auction. She wanted $5 million for the property, basically. And they had to hand over 4% of the box office, seriously, of this movie, 50% of the merchandising revenue and music-related material, and 70% of income from book tie-ins. And the person to play the Grinch had to be among these four people: Jack Nicholson, Jim Carrey, Robin Williams, and Dustin Hoffman. Oh, and they would not consider a director or writer who hadn't earned at least $1 million on a previous picture. Cool. So, basically, Mrs. Geisel doesn't really give a shit about her husband's legacy. I mean, I don't know the financial workings of the Seuss estate, but damn, lady, seriously? So basically they got Jim Carrey. Apparently Nicholson was close. There are tons of comedy directors, including the Farrelly brothers, went out for this. Eventually it landed with Ron Howard because Brian Grazer was one of the people pitching, and he was like, hey, I'll get Ron Howard in. He has no autorial voice. He doesn't. Seriously. It's sort of like with Willow and Solo have a connection in certain ones, but like he's never really made a movie like The Grinch before or since. He really doesn't have an autorial voice. Sometimes I like that about him, but it's like, is there any connective tissue between this and Rush? I don't think so. The problem with this movie is it kind of does what the Illumination Grinch does, where it tries to accomplish almost too much with a story that gives you very little, and is a very simple story, and it wants to accomplish all these other things that like no one asked it to do. And this movie does it to an extreme degree. Like he's showing like the post office, they have a big tree and there's a competition and they want to bring the Grinch in and make him like the cheer captain or something. Oh, and he has a backstory and he had a love and all this stuff. It's like, don't do any of that. Make it as simple as humanly possible. Put the songs in, put some extra stuff. I sort of like that they gave it a backstory to the Grinch a little bit and how he's connected to the Who's. But I almost, ultimately, when I was watching, I was like, at first I thought that was interesting, but it just felt like early 2000s storytelling where like, hey, that's the origin. And I'm like, but did I need that origin? Like, don't ruin the Grinch like you ruined Michael Myers. Come on. I didn't really need that. And it kind of made the Grinch just like a social I guess he always was, but like a social shut-in from the society. It kind of accentuated the social shut-in aspect, I guess, but I don't think it really adds anything to the character. Often Ron Howard's camera is moving around way too much. It feels like he's trying to shoot far too much of like the sets and like the different people wearing this ugly-ass Who makeup, which I don't understand that at all. Like these ugly noses and like what was that about? The makeup was interesting but also horrible. Like, why do that? I think Jim Carrey is the Grinch. Like, Jim Carrey took a lot of critical shit for this movie, and I don't think that's fair because I think Jim Carrey is a great performer. But I will say this is an interesting period of Jim Carrey because this is right after he did the Truman Show, and then he did Man on the Moon, and maybe he did something in between, but I'm pretty sure it was those two. I actually think Jim Carrey is a very great actor, but it didn't seem like there wasn't really anywhere for him to go as like a non-movie star. Like, he kind of just had to be a movie star, and the awards thing, like, it just didn't really work out. Like, he got, like, I think 2 Golden Globes, but he didn't get any Oscar nominations. Truman Show's a classic, Man on the Moon less so. And he had worked with good directors, you know, Peter Weir and Milos Forman. It felt like in 2000 we did this, Me, Myself, and Irene, and the Grinch, he was kind of on movie star autopilot to a certain degree. But I think it kind of works for this film because, much like I've said about Robin Williams in the past, and I sort of understand, like, Nicholson I think would have been a really weird Grinch. I'm a little curious about that. The thing with having what Robin Williams did in things like Flubber and his more special effects things is he definitely understands you have to bring it so much as an actor, or it's not really going to work as well. Jim Carrey is doing a full-fledged Jim Carrey performance, you know, in this, and he's really bringing it as an actor. I don't feel like he thinks he has earned it. It doesn't feel like he's really pushing himself the way, like Liar Liar I think might be the peak of a lot of his performances, and it just feels like after that he's really trying to push himself, and this feels like he's hitting similar beats, but he's doing it under all this makeup. It's still kind of a feat in itself. I think he's trying to get through a lot of muck of this movie, which is really a lot of nonsense. Both him and Ron Howard didn't like the inappropriate humor in this. I like the one joke where this stork thing dropping off babies, and this one baby who's dropped off by a stork, he goes, "Oh honey, our baby's here. Hey, looks like your boss." That was funny because obviously, you know, they didn't have sex because it was the story. It's a cute joke. I think he asked everyone to kiss his ass or something. Like, that was like it was terrible. And like, he was improvising, and they kept more improv stuff that I think they all thought they weren't going to do. I do think that kind of, for the most part, that sort of cheapens the film. I mean, it's sad that the Seuss estate wanted to do this film and really absolutely wanted this film to be made, and the live actionness of it I don't think really works at all. I think Seuss works better in animation. People have said The Cat in the Hat. I've never seen The Cat in the Hat. It just looks like kind of this really ugly, kind of weird, creepy world that shouldn't exist. It's like if you made something in a lab and you're like, let's just kill this and never tell anyone. And that's kind of like what these live action Dr. Seuss movies ultimately really are. Especially like this one is just like none of the special effects. I mean, it's like it won for best makeup, I think. It's all that stuff, and like Jim Carrey, like, you know, was very committed to making sure the makeup was on, all that stuff, and like I think that's fine, and like I think it looked like they put a lot of effort into it, but it just looked like something that looked horrible. Like, no one likes that design, and I think this 90s design of like moving the camera all around and trying to shoot way too much of crowds and stuff, it's like I think they were going for like they were influenced by Altman. They're like, why did Altman do that? And they didn't think of that. They're just like, let's just shoot a bunch of the crowd. We just really get the reaction, man. And you're like, it didn't feel that way. It just felt like chaos. I didn't like how it got to the depression of them losing all their stuff, because that's like not the point. Like, I understand you needed an extra beat. Like, a lot of this stuff felt like in the special you have songs. In this you have wasted emotional beats you don't need. And that makes for a much weaker film. I know Ron Howard said, oh, he's such a big fan of Chuck Jones in this book and all this stuff. And hey, there's a bunch of crap you gotta say to make like $20 million. But I get that it's part of people's nostalgia because you were young then, but I don't get it in terms of a filmmaking thing. You know, there's certain films that I like. Hey, look, I watch Masters of the Universe like sometimes every couple of years because I was a kid. It's not really a great movie, and I get that, but I don't think this is a good film at all. I think it's actually probably one of Ron Howard's worst, and I think it's definitely actually worse than the Illumination film. So, like, Where Are You Christmas? Like, that doesn't even... I just don't... God, that song's so bad. Like, that's not like... I don't want, like, 2000s bad ballads. Like, there's a reason I don't think they get played on... I don't really listen to the radio, but, like, I don't really listen to that garbage. Like, but, like, You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch has a cool, jazzy vibe to it. It's interesting, both this one and the Illumination one try to kind of rip the Grinch out, and basically they want to use the recognizability of that special and that book, but not use any of the music, not use any of the things you like about it, and just kind of make this whole different thing. And you might think that's a good idea, but it's not, because your whole original thing is so horrible. Like, no one sat there and went like, is this like a good idea? Because like nothing about this, like this camera moving around these elaborate sets that like look just like a terrible theme park that no one would want to go to. Like Dr. Seuss Land would seem like a cool idea in a book, but then you look at it and go, this is fun like once, but I don't really want to go back. I just really didn't like this movie at all. I didn't get, like, it just felt like it needed a lot to pad out this script to make it into something. And this just felt like Hollywood's very much for-profit kind of thing, and I guess like Hollywood, you know, needs to make money, but this felt like a really ugly, like, wasn't really about entertainment. This film isn't about entertainment. It's about matching all these things and somehow getting this to work into a feature film, and it felt more like an assemblance of things than it felt like an actual movie. If this is your nostalgia, fine. That's, you know, I can't really take that away from you. I didn't go into this thinking this will never be as good as the special, because that's like air. It's obvious. No, it's because, you know what, they built these sets. That's sort of interesting. Ron Howard did sort of a different movie. Maybe I'll be open-minded to it. I know people like it. And even in that mindset, it was pretty clear. I was like, what the hell am I watching? Like, there was very few times while I was watching this, I didn't think, what the fuck is this? And I don't think it ever could really get past that, because it doesn't know what it is. This is what I guess we're doing now, and it just, like, it felt like that, and a panicked director and studio trying to hopefully get this thing to work because they know they can have a hit with it. And it's kind of the emptier side of art and commerce. I don't think Jim Carrey felt that way in his performance. I think Ron Howard definitely did, and Brian Grazer and Universal and Geisel's estate. And that's why this film is like sort of has an emptiness to it. It has an emptiness to it because if it got all its Christmas toys taken away, it would ask to see your manager. It wouldn't find the true meaning of Christmas. You can smell it when a movie's faking. And this movie is faking because it doesn't have any genuineness to it. And although I think there's a very genuineness to Jim Carrey, and I think he has an honesty that you can't sort of deny on screen, but I don't think everyone else in this film could really hide it as well. But that they knew, like, this attempt and what they're doing with it was not really saying anything in an honest tradition. It was saying it in a very cold, kind of corporate kind of way, in the way that Batman, Robin, and all those things. It's saying something about cartoons by people who I don't think really like cartoons. I think they think of them as silly and crazy and kids stuff, but they have no respect for them, while also doing this, while not respecting Dr. Seuss, but making a Dr. Seuss adaptation. That's the biggest problem with this. It has no respect for these things it's trying to emulate. And if you're thinking like, well, is that important? Tell me the difference between a Martin Scorsese film or a Brian De Palma film that's influenced, like Brian De Palma, he's influenced by Hitchcock and, you know, the Battleship Potemkin. And there's a real love of cinema and what he's doing in those filmmakers. There's no love of Chuck Jones in this. And there was never going to be a love of Chuck Jones in this. It doesn't care about those things. What it cares about is making a successful 2000s movie. And I was around then, and I thought maybe I was being a grumpy teenager, but as I've watched those films, they just frankly don't hold up because there's not much to hold up to. They're kind of empty vessels of films, and this is probably one of the emptiest. I disagree with it being a Christmas classic because it is an awful mess of a film. Someone who didn't grow up with its opinion on this film seems to be the standard one, that this was absolutely horrible. But I can for sure say that this is definitely, you know, this is definitely like a really, really horrible Christmas film, and I don't think it will ever really be part of any tradition for me. So after that, Merry Christmas. So if you have seen The Grinch and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. Oh, also, I noticed in the ads for this, and even on the poster, it used to say The Grinch. And in the UK, it was the Grinch, but it would say the Grinch like highlighted in a different font, and then around it, Who Stole Christmas, or How the Grinch Stole Christmas. And it's just like, why? What was up with that? Like on ads, it would just say the Grinch, and then it would later say it's actually How the Grinch Stole Christmas. Like, why was that? I don't know. Anyway, see you next time. Sorry I just shat on your childhood. Have a good Christmas, I guess. I'm sure you're not gonna like me. Unsubscribe. Merry Christmas. Peace.